came out of nowhere and killed for no other reason than he wanted to get close to a celebrity.
Front page, cover of People, it shocked people to the core.
Such pain and anger and rage over this.
The threatening letters were very dark.
The horror seeps into every cell of your being.
How could somebody take her life?
He made it sound like it was an accident.
Pronounced dead 30 minutes later.
He's just not like a normal person.
That was the final act of rejection. The red flags were all there. Just say no.
Millions of people mourned the tragic death of John Lennon. Witnesses say the gunman followed the Lennons as they got out of a limousine and walked past the Dakota.
Mark David Chapman was an obsessed fan. He carried a copy of Catcher in the Rye.
He said, now, whenever anyone thinks of Lennon, they'll think of me.
Six years after the murder of John Lennon, the violence of the 80s is still dominating the news. Americans looking for an escape find it in the golden age of television. Family sitcoms like Cosby and Family Ties dominate the ratings.
Oh, thank you.
On a quiet July day, a single gunshot rings out from actress Rebecca Schaeffer's apartment. Rebecca's frightened neighbor, Lynn Marta, calls 911.
Marta heard the gunshot. She said it sounded like a cannon.
By the time police and an ambulance arrive at 120 North Sweetser Avenue, the shooter is long gone. All the EMS workers see is a bleeding woman in the doorway.
They saw her lying there. She fell back, and her feet kept the door open.
The ambulance rushes Rebecca to the hospital.
She's just minutes from Cedars of Sinai Hospital, but unfortunately, she was the victim of a penetrating chest wound, and she was pronounced dead 30 minutes later.
As police process the scene, there are no obvious clues as to who murdered the popular 21-year-old actress.
It's not known why she opened the door or if she knew the person who shot her.
They didn't have the gun, so no fingerprints that they knew of. Back in '89, there were no computers really that police were using, so it was difficult to communicate with other police agencies.
Investigators question neighbors, hoping to find out more.
Several of them had said they had seen a man kind of lurking around the apartment all day, kind of fidgeting, nervous.
A frightened neighbor who didn't want to be seen said her husband spotted a suspicious man near Schaeffer's building.
He was coming from Beverly, and he was on the other side of the street.
Within hours, investigators release a detailed description of the shooter.
The suspect is described as a white male, approximately 20 to 30 years old, between 5'7" and 6 feet tall, medium build.
And by evening, one story dominates the 6 o'clock news.
There was a gunshot before that, in the screen before that.
The woman was dead, shot inside of the front door.
I think everyone was shocked. I remember it being a huge story in the media.
It was the top of every newscast. It was front page. It was very shocking.
The murder absolutely put Rebecca in a huge spotlight. It wasn't the spotlight she was supposed to have.
I was sitting literally in the office when we spoke at the district attorney's office.
Marcia Clark, who will later gain fame for prosecuting O.J. Simpson in 1995, takes on the Schaeffer murder case shortly after the actress is shot dead.
We were working shoulder to shoulder with the detectives right from the very start.
As in any investigation, police are also exploring those closest to Rebecca, including her boyfriend, Brad Silberling.
Not right now. I'm sorry.
Brad is inconsolable.
Brad was very, very destroyed by this, very upset by the murder.
Brad isn't a suspect, but Marsha Clark meets with him to see what he knows.
Very helpful to me. He was one of the people I asked about her habits and would she have gone to the door and what did she do when people rang the buzzer.
It was a mystery. Who killed Rebecca Schaeffer? The police really didn't have a clue.
As Marsha Clark works with detectives, they find a curious connection. The case is eerily reminiscent of one 7 years earlier, when another actress was attacked.
He shows up at her house. He's a man with a violent criminal record. The red flags were all there.
The morning after the murder, an unexpected break from 400 miles away.
The information came out on the police radio.
Tucson, Arizona police officer Paul Hallams receives an unusual call.
Some citizens they said there was a guy acting strangely on the freeway near downtown Tucson.
Police had found him running through traffic.
He was screaming that he'd killed Rebecca Schaeffer.
When Hallams arrives, police have managed to get the man off the road.
People actually thought he might be suicidal. We took him downtown to the main police station.
The man tells police his name is Robert John Bardo.
He was seen very passive and a loner. He's just not like a normal person.
And he can't stop talking about the fact that he just killed the actress Rebecca Schaeffer.
The Arizona State Police took a statement from him. In his confession, he said, I went to the door, I didn't expect to do anything. I don't know why I had the gun, but I was holding it, and then she knocked me. And he made it sound like it was an accident.
Hallams had seen the news reports about Rebecca's death. Could it be that a delusional Bardo had also heard about the murder, but didn't actually commit it? Police will need evidence to verify Bardo's story.
We started making phone calls to Los Angeles to find out more about the details.
Tucson police immediately fax Bardo's picture to detectives in Los Angeles. They show it to Rebecca's neighbors.
There were witnesses who are able to identify him because they saw him walking away.
In his confession to Officer Hallams, Bardo also reveals that he left some items on a rooftop near Rebecca's home during his escape. Following that lead, police in LA recover the yellow shirt, a gun holster, and the book Catcher in the Rye. Detectives learn Bardo has a troubled background.
Has a hard time holding down a job as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box.
Was hospitalized 2 times for mental illness.
In 1985, Bardo would turn his attentions to a young pop singer sensation of the 80s named Debbie Gibson.
Bardo came to New York City to try to track down Debbie Gibson. And that's when he visited the Dakota where John Lennon was killed by Mark David Chapman.
Bardo identifies with Chapman's feelings of isolation and inadequacy and is impressed by his newfound celebrity.
You have a man who's a total loser, and now all of a sudden he's somebody.
And he begins to think about how Chapman carried a copy of Catcher in the Rye.
A book that tells the tale of a depressed, alienated, angry young man. On a fall evening in 1986, Robert John Bardo finds Rebecca Schaeffer.
He sees her on his television set, and my sister Sam.
I can't believe it. You were actually jealous of me.
He believed that they had some kind of a connection. That, you know, she could see him from the TV set. He started writing to her, believing that they had this relationship.
Clark discovers the content of the letters Bardo had sent to Rebecca were harmless.
It was about ecology, preserving the earth, and that sort of thing.
She believes the fact that Bardo sent Rebecca friendly letters, but kept the angry ones, shows intent.
Those letters were extremely important at trial because they showed premeditation, but he had the control not to send them to her, not to warn her of what he was planning to do.
A year after My Sister Sam ended its run, at his home in Arizona, Bardo eagerly awaited seeing his wholesome Rebecca in a new film, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills.
She didn't have to do any love scenes on My Sister Sam. This was a different sort of movie.
My idea of taking a risk is losing my birth control pills or shopping at Saks without a sale.
As Bardo watched, his initial excitement turned into enraged disappointment.
He felt so betrayed.
Her film, Class Struggles of Beverly Hills, was a tipping point for this disturbed young man, and that didn't fit the image that he had of her.
I know what you were doing.
When he saw her do the love scene, he wrote the letter that threatened her, that talked about her having a hole in her soul.
And he decided that he was going to take her life.
Bardo's horrific plan was riddled with copycat elements that he gleaned from the sick and troubled stalkers elevated to fame earlier that decade.
He identified with these people, like Arthur Jackson, Mark David Chapman, and wanted to follow in their lead.
Following in Jackson's diabolical footsteps, Bardo hired a private detective who found out where Rebecca lived through the California Department of Motor Vehicles.
He charges him $250. The minimum wage back then was $4.25. That means that Robert Bardo had to work a week and a half, all day, every day, mopping floors, just to get Rebecca Schaeffer's address. That's how obsessed he was.
This time, when Bardo went to California to meet his unrequited love interest, he was armed with information and a gun.
The gun was bought for him in Arizona by his brother.
Bardo gave him the money. They actually went to the gun shop together. No more stuffed bear, no more candy, no more flowers. He's serious this time. He takes off for Los Angeles again.
On Tuesday, July 18th, 1989, 9:15 a.m., Robert Bardo shows up at Rebecca's doorstep and presses the buzzer.
Rebecca coming to the door really did surprise Bardo.
Shocked and starstruck, Bardo tells Rebecca he's her biggest fan.
And there stood Robert Bardo with the glossy picture that he had been sent several years before.
He asks for an autograph. Rebecca complies.
And then said, "I'm sorry, I have to go. Get ready," and closed the door. Now that was the final act of rejection for him.
And he goes off and he begins to brood.
He actually called his sister and told his sister he was a block and a half away from Rebecca Schaeffer's apartment.
Bardo tells his sister Arlene that he's going to do his mission. At the time, Arlene doesn't realize he's dead serious.
He goes back again to Rebecca Schaeffer's and he rings her up.
He had the gun behind his back. That showed lying in wait. That showed he was taking her by ambush.
She comes down to the door again.
She opened it, and without saying a word, he shot her once through the heart.
And then he describes how she looked at him.
Bullet hit her left, skirted up, and she was just screaming.
In a chilling taped interview, Bardo details his love-hate obsession with the actress and reenacts the shooting like a gunslinger in a Western movie.
This.
The celebrity nature of it, the fame, the going back to Chapman's comment about whenever anybody thinks of Lennon, they'll think of me.
Clark makes the case that the disturbing unsent letters that Bardo hid in his attic are proof that he knew right from wrong.
Had he sent them, certainly she would have known to at least be wary of someone coming to her door.
Bardo never takes the stand. After a month-long trial, it's the moment Rebecca's fans, friends, and family have been waiting for.
I find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder, both as premeditated and lying in wait.
On December 20th, 1991, Bardo learns his fate.
Defendant is sentenced to the state prison for a period of life without possibility of parole.
We sat through the trial phase, we sat through the sentencing phase. I was so emotionally barraged that it was just numbness and wide-eyedness, anger.
Although the trial was grueling, Rebecca's parents feel justice has been served, but that won't bring their daughter back.
I miss her every day. There isn't a day that I don't think of the sorts of things that we did together.
I will never forget it. It's imprinted in my mind. How could anybody take this beautiful, sweet young lady who was so kind, who would never hurt anybody, who would give somebody the shirt off her back?
The loss of that little angel is something from which you do not recover.
If there's any silver lining to be found in a tragedy like this, it is that stalking laws were enacted as a result of what happened to her. All of us are safer.
As the 80s come to a close, Rebecca's tragic death results in actions intended to make the following decades less dangerous. In 1990, California adopts the first ever anti-stalking bill. Today, every state and the federal government have a similar law.
When we returned to Portland, my wife co-founded Oregonians Against Gun Violence, which is still continuing to this